Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion for another Tuesday. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I broadcast from today, which is the land of the Wadawurrung people, paying my respect to their elders past, present and future, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who might be watching us live or on the replay. My guest today, Michael, is coming in from Sydney. Whose lands are you on, Michael?
I'm in the Winji-Caribbee region, which is the land of the Gundungurra and Tharawal people. So they kind of have connections to the Winji-Caribbee, Wallandilly river regions around, well, you might know it as the Southern Highlands region of New South Wales as well.
Yeah, cool. I like that show so far. We're really traipsing around the country, so getting to learn a lot about the different traditional owners. Yeah. So today we're talking to Michael Woods. Michael and I kind of linked together on LinkedIn once upon a time at the start of the year, and it so happened that Michael had something that I needed, and that was a platform to run my training on. And so that's what I did. My courses, the inclusive leadership training and the LGBTI inclusion training linked out, is hosted on a platform through Michael that he helps me out with. But what we soon learned is that we both have such similarities in the work that we do, but also some nice, unique differences. Michael, I'm not going to steal your thunder. If you could do what I do every week and ask us to really tell us your story, why you got into inclusion work and what type of work that you do currently.
Yeah, sure. And I'll try not to take up the whole time frame that we've got for our conversation, because there's probably a little bit to get through. So my background is in sports administration. I started my career in working in sport. My background is, I got a degree in sports administration and management with a focus on coaching science. And basically, towards the end of my studies, I kind of landed this internship in what was at the time called the Disability Sport Education Program, which was a Sport Australia or Sports Commission funded program that basically helped sports providers, schools, clubs become more inclusive of people with disability. So that's kind of was my first exposure to this whole thing called inclusion and in sport. And that kind of transitioned into a job with Swimming Australia, where I led the disability inclusion strategy work there, which then evolved into some Paralympic performance pathways stuff, classification, and being involved with the Australian Paralympic swim team and high performance outcomes there. And sort of fast forward to today, 11 years later, I'm still on the books at Swimming, and right now I'm leading their inclusion strategy work and reinvigorating their national inclusion framework, with a key focus right now on trans and gender diversity, governance and policy. So very deep in working with sport. A couple of years ago, I went part-time in the paid gig, started my own consultancy called Inclusive Sport Design, where I help sports clubs with resources, content and information about how to be more inclusive across the broad domains of inclusion. So not just disability, but all the areas that we kind of talk about in that space. So that's been sort of chugging along. In doing that work, I picked up some online learning projects, which I kind of really enjoyed and did quite well at, and it started to become the bulk of my business. And so I made a plan last year actually to set up or transition into e-learning a bit more. And then COVID happened. And so I kind of fast-tracked that strategy and launched an e-learning business called Impact Leaders E-Learning in the sort of midst of the first COVID lockdown. Call me crazy, but when else should you start a business than in a global shutdown, right? So, and that's where we connected. And so I provide e-learning solutions through that business as well, not just in the area of sport and inclusion, but across a whole host of areas, and that's growing at the moment as well. So my passion is inclusion, diversity, innovative practice, moving the dial on culture, and helping organisations, I guess, take their audience or their staff or their workforce through really practical change using e-learning and technology-based learning solutions. So that's it in a nutshell in terms of career stuff. Outside of that, I'm also a director of an organisation called the Inclusion Club, which is an international charity that that promotes good practice around diversity and inclusion in sport and recreation and PE. So a few things going on. And I'm a dad, and I've got a 3-year-old who's outside running around the house. Hopefully he doesn't visit us, although he might, and that'll be fun.
We're totally ready for that and welcome that. It still amazes me, everybody who I get on this who's working in inclusion manages to do an absolute bazillion things with their time. It's the nature of the space. And I guess that is because we're also passionate about the type of work that we do. So you constantly say yes when opportunities arise. Yeah. We wanted to talk today, kind of focus on that e-learning, inclusion training, because you know, you and I both know that inclusion training is definitely, I guess, sought after from organisations. There's certainly a lot of requests come through, and sometimes those requests are good in that they're looking to create meaningful change and it aligns well with their strategies, and they've got a series of work to happen after the training's done. But quite often also it's an in and out thing. It's, can you deliver a 2-hour, 3-hour session, or can you do it in an hour? And that's, you know, the start and end of what you hear from. Yeah. And so, you know, and you and I have spoken about this idea of blended learning, of e-learning, and how we can perhaps shift the dial a little bit on the way people and organisations expect to do inclusion training. And we talked about the types of things somebody can look for in inclusion training. So say you are you're working in an organisation, you've been told it's time to do some training on whatever it might be, LGBTI, disability, or diversity and inclusion more broadly. How do you recognise that the training solutions that are being provided to you are actually going to create change? Yeah,
it's a big question, and it's a really important one, because, as you say, there's plenty of options for someone as a business or you know, a leader inside a business or an organisation to go out, bring someone in, or bring a product in that delivers inclusion training, and get it done, right? But the key thing is, as you say, is it moving the dial? And so there's probably a few things that people can think about even before they make the decision about what training they're going to do, right through to what they do after the training that will help it be more effective. Because at the end of the day, this is a business investment, and you've got to translate that into some kind of positive outcome. Yeah, buddy. Sorry, I've just had my visa. Hello. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, say hello. This is Jack. Right. Okay, now you need to go. Bye. I don't have it. I'm really sorry. We just got Jack. Come and sit here. Come and sit here.
Inclusion at work.
Yeah, I don't have it.
Just to call out to the viewers too, don't place comments or questions in the stream. If you've got any questions, you want to say hi to Jack, you can do that too.
Sorry about that. Always, he's right on time with the visits.
A star in the making.
Let's just pick up where I left off, huh?
Yeah.
So I was talking about it's an investment, right? And we've got to make sure we're getting that outcome for the business. So what I would recommend is people start, before they even pick their training, is take some time to understand what outcome they want from it, what change they actually want to see in their organisation. Because you could do inclusion training that is about unconscious bias, or it's cultural competency, or whatever it is, or all of the above. But if it's not linked to a strategic outcome or not linked to your organisational values, then it might not necessarily propel you forward effectively. So that's tip number one, is think about your outcomes and then align your training solution to that. The other piece is, and this is kind of universal for any learning program that you want to do, is know your user, or your learner or your worker, right? So if you know their role, you can actually then choose the learning that's going to best suit what you want them to be able to do. At the end of the day, it's nice to know stuff, but if they're not going to do something different at the end of it, then you're not going to see any change. So take time to understand, and it might be different for different areas of your business. So if you've got front-facing kind of customer service type people, in my world, people like coaches and development officers, their needs would be quite different to management or executive or HR. So understanding what it is you need your people to do as a result of undergoing the training, that will help make it more relevant and then therefore more practical, so that it's more applicable to the business, more applicable to roles. And then you can actually put measurable outcomes against that. So you can say, we want to do cultural competency training for our customer service workforce so that they're better able to sell to people from diverse cultures because they understand language and culture and religious issues or whatever. You could do cultural competency training for your executive and management as well, but gear it more towards how do we plan and strategize? Maybe it's marketing. How do we build our marketing materials in a better way, which is more relevant to their role? So knowing that learner right up front will lead to more effective outcomes for your learning program as well. The other thing I would sort of suggest is, and I kind of alluded to it at the start, is it needs to really be quite broad, and not broad as in surface level. I mean, it needs to address the broad kind of domains of diversity and inclusion that are out there. And, what sometimes happens, and right now, things like unconscious bias training are kind of trendy, particularly in corporate land. And it's kind of seen as this panacea, silver bullet solution to addressing diversity issues in organizations, particularly around cultural and race issues. But if it's delivered in isolation alone, it doesn't really shift the culture towards change. It might make people feel better about themselves or more aware or more woke to cultural issues. It might not necessarily lead to the whole organizational culture shift that you need to actually move the dial on inclusion outcomes. So I would consider the more broad solutions around inclusion that you need, and not just choose one particular trending or one particular kind of aspect of it, simply because it's more readily available or because it's the best price point, or whatever the decision making is around it, because you need to think about the whole business. And it goes back to, if you know your objective right up front, then you can choose the solutions that are going to best serve those outcomes. The other thing, and this is something that I really, really focus on with anything that I build and recommend to people, is it has to be practical. So like I said, it's good to know more stuff. Like, it's good to know the demographic makeup of the population. Like, it's good to know that. It's good to know barriers and challenges, right? But if you aren't confident, and this goes to confidence, not competence, right? This goes to confidence. If you're not confident to actually do something about it, change the way you act, change the way you do your work, change the way you speak, change the things you buy, whatever the change is, if you're not able to do that, then you're not going to move the dial either. So it needs to be practical. So how does dealing with different cultural backgrounds translate in my day-to-day work? What are the things I need to do? Or what does a LGBTI friendly workplace policy around employment look like? And then how do I write that policy? You think of a whole range of different things, but it has to be practical. And from my sport experience, that's so important, because a lot of the people that I design training for are volunteer coach types, parents in community sport. Even if they're in employed positions, they're very hands-on types of roles, and they need to be told or shown how to implement the changes that you want from people. And again, it goes back to knowing what that change is that you need them to do. And a really good example is in sport, in coaching, giving models of how to be an inclusive coach is more useful than teaching someone all about the different domains of the LGBTI community or the disability impairment types that exist, right? But if you give them a toolkit of this is how you adapt and modify the way you coach, then that's going to be practical, and they can put that into practice in their role. So, and you can apply that to a whole range of sectors. So it has to be practical. Look for those sorts of things. Go beyond the information. What else is there? Look, it's got to be in your business context. So a lot of times you can get these plug and play type programs, or you hire someone to come in and do it. But if they don't spend time actually contextualizing it for your business or your organization or your audience, then it's not going to kind of land with your people. So, and that might be like in the kind of case studies or scenarios or learning validation that they use, it needs to reflect your business and the things that your workers do day to day, or that your audience does day to day in their role. That's really important because it makes it real, and it shows or gives people the confidence again to actually implement what you're asking them to do, because they can see it in their world as opposed to being outside of their experience a little bit. And speaking of experience, if it can, this should be a must, but it needs to reflect lived experience. So if the people presenting or developing your learning don't have lived experience of some form of diversity domain, it needs to be incorporated into the learning material in some way, whether that's through scenarios, case studies, interviews, whatever, because that voice is so important. That's the reason we do this stuff, right? Is to elevate, understand, and hear those voices, hear those experiences, and better understand them, build empathy to those experiences. So it has to include that in some way, shape, or form, for sure.
Yeah, and you've just flashed me back to a particular training session that I attended once. That was cultural diversity training, and it was delivered by a white woman whose grandparents had migrated to Australia from Ireland. And it was all, I remember the map being up on the screen, she was using a projector, and there was a map on the screen, and these are the different cultural ideas of people in different parts of the world. And, you know, where you've said competence versus confidence, it's entirely what it was. It was just, you know, it had zero lived experience. It was really just theory being presented in a way that left you with going, what do I do differently? What have I learned from this?
Yeah.
Besides, I could maybe fill out a quiz on the content that you've delivered.
Yeah. You can recall what was on the map, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean you have increased empathy, understanding, or ability to put yourself somehow in the experience of people that you're talking about. And, you know, this is probably the opportunity for me to declare my privilege as a middle-class white male cisgendered man, like, and standing up here talking about diversity and inclusion. And it's something that, particularly in the last few years, with, you know, BLM and gender equality, marriage equality, and you know, #MeToo, and all these kind of big social kind of movements that are going on around this space at the moment. I'm much more mindful of putting my voice to the background of what I'm doing, because I have kind of built a business around this stuff, but not with lived experience of any form of you know, discrimination or barriers in terms of, particularly in sport where I've spent most of my time. So I'm mindful of trying to do that more and ensure that I'm not speaking for people. But what I do is bring framework and bring kind of background and kind of toolkits for people to enable them to do that themselves as well. So it's a really important part of this whole process is not talking about people without them in that conversation as well, both in the learning and then in the outcomes of that learning as well. It's really, really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess the final thing and the kind of extended part of that point is you need to measure your outcomes in some way. So if you go down the road of delivering inclusion training and you haven't thought about how you're going to measure the impact of that, good or bad, then you probably need to stop and figure that piece out, because you need to be able to show, from a business point of view, the value of your investment. But also you need to be able to, I guess, assess the efficacy of the program that you've delivered and how that's shifted people's skills, knowledge, actions in the context of your business. So, and you can do that on on a small scale, or you can go and get external people to do assessments on your organisation and things. It's all about capacity. But at a minimum, you need to know whether people are doing things differently.
And that's a key point. And it's often something that I really, I harp on a bit about this, about having a really strong diversity and inclusion strategy or plan that will include some element of training. But that's not the entirety of the work that you need to do. It's a tiny little piece of the work that you need to do, and you should be able to measure its efficacy through the D&I strategy and plan that you've already got in place, that should be measuring these outcomes and seeing what does shift the dial and what doesn't. Super important point, that we're actually not just basing the success of the training program on a one-page survey monkey at the end of the session that asks you how much you enjoyed the training. Well, usually people love inclusion.
And often that's all it is, right? It's rate how much you enjoyed the training, or self-rate how much, self-rate if you know more. Like it's do you know more than you did before you did the course? Well, I hope so. But that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about impact measurement. We're talking about what are the shifts towards your objective. And like, if you think about, like, take another sport kind of context example, is strategically sports organizations are looking to increase their memberships and increase the diversity of their memberships or customers across their products and services, right? So the training that's delivered for that objective needs to be linked to a measure of, I did this training, then I implemented these changes or interventions, which led to this shift in engagement among the target cohort, whatever that might be. And that gives you a measure of impact and efficacy of the training program. It could be, we need to diversify our customer base for this particular product line. How do we do that? Or it might be, we need to diversify our leadership team through better employment policy and strategy and recruitment processes. So how do we do that, measure it, and link it to the outcome? And that's why it's so important to know your objective, know your user, make a business context, and put a mechanism to measure the impact around it. And then that tells you what you actually deliver for training.
Yeah, I love the framework you've put around that, and it gives people a really cool takeaway to really sit down and assess why they're doing this training. Because, and my experience has been, there's a lot of times where it's literally maybe one of the board members or one of the executives has got excited about inclusion and maybe one particular element of inclusion, and they've asked somebody to go out and find somebody to deliver training in that space. Or there was a problem. Exactly. We had a complaint, or something went wrong, or somebody's complained about the fact that there are only that there are no queer people in the organisation, or whatever it might be.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, there's a training for that. But it's absolutely, and I always say it's absolutely important to jump on that, because if you've got an executive board member or senior leadership who's started to get interested in this space, great. But work with the training provider to make this the seed of something, make this seed something. And that's why, I'm always biased. I do think inclusive leadership training is just such a great place to start, no matter which part of the organisation you're delivering training to, because it brings that broad brush. I love the way you described, it is about the confidence rather than the competence. It's about creating space for people to go, this is a little uncomfortable, some of this. I'm not quite sure what I should do in this situation. Giving people that sense of confidence that they can act, that they can ask for change, so that then they can go about and demand a diversity and inclusion strategy, or, know how they might play their role in the existing one.
Yeah.
And
related to that is, and if you look at research and analysis of D&I strategies, interventions in many sectors, is there, and especially in sport, is if you ask someone, is inclusion good? Should you take action on inclusion? Is diversity good? Should you take action on diversity? 99% of people say yes, of course. But that doesn't translate to action. And so there's this disconnect between the intention, the willingness to do something, and the actual capability, confidence to do what's required. And so if you can bridge that gap in whatever area of your business is applicable, then that's how you shift the culture. And that doesn't come from competency-based compliance training alone. And especially if it's compliance focused, like you must do this anti-discrimination course because we can't be racist, right? Of course you shouldn't be racist. But how do you create a safe, culturally respectful, diverse culture in your business so those people don't feel like there's racism in your organization? That's the disconnect, and that's what you're looking to achieve through this kind of a training program.
And there's been some really interesting research to show that people who are made to do, harassment, discrimination training, whatever it is that the compliance training is for your organisation, that they actually are much less likely to learn, but actually it can reinforce ideas that they had because they walk into it feeling begrudged. And that's not how we help people learn in the inclusion space. It's not something that if they think it's something they have to do, then they drag their feet and they actually find ways to make it seem ridiculous or seem out of reach or unachievable. You have to create that space for people to learn. And I always talk about not making them confrontational spaces. Yes, at times I want to get confrontational in training, absolutely. But as soon as I do that, heckles are up and defences are up. And if you're defensive, you can't learn. So there's not a lot of value in creating that type of space where people feel that they have to come to the party and they have to take on what you're delivering. We need to be really conscious of the type of learning environment we provide people.
That's right, because there's a difference between conflict and discomfort. And I think you can be uncomfortable in a supportive, safe space and learn something and build empathy. But if it's about conflict and friction and us and them in the context of the information you're working through, or that's the motive for coming in, that there's friction and we have to fix the friction because this person and that person don't get along in the business or in the world, then that friction stays in the process of understanding it. Whereas if you come from a base of, we actually have a lot of stuff in common as human beings, as empathetic people, as a business, all working towards the same objectives. And so this is about building a culture where we can collaborate, work together, be more innovative, be safer, be more open, but be uncomfortable in the fact that we're going to uncover some stuff about ourselves and others that we maybe don't want to acknowledge, or that it's difficult to work through, like talking about racism and discrimination and things like that, and the history of the gay community across the world. In Australia, there's some uncomfortable stuff there. But unless you uncover that, work through it, build a way forward through learning and kind of understanding, you stay in that space of friction.
Yeah, absolutely. We're running out of time very rapidly. This has been great, Michael, and I think there's so many tips there for people to take away and consider, and also for people delivering inclusion training, just to reflect on our own practices and what we do and when we go into an organisation, because we all do it. Most of us are consultants, so we have to take the money that comes, and so we do go in and deliver what the client wants. And so thinking about how we can kind of mould them towards some more sustainable, ongoing change and actions is really helpful. So I think this has been a great session. I just wanted to quickly make a call out to people. Some of you may have seen across my social media channels this morning, I've opened up a specific cohort in the inclusive leadership course that Michael helped me develop. It's a blended learning course, so there's online content that you can do in your own time, and then there's some live sessions. And what I've done is created a cohort just for people who are aspiring to work in the inclusion space or are currently already working in the inclusion space. It's about creating networks, having some people who are working and working through similar challenges and barriers, and bouncing ideas off each other, and also taking the tips and the content that I deliver and picking it apart That's what it's there for us to kind of make it better and see if we can create change in workplaces. So 48 hours you've got to sign up to that if you want to use the discount code that you'll see in the post that I made on LinkedIn. I'd love to get a really good group. There's only 10 spots, and I make them bigger than that because I think we need to keep them tight and we can really learn off each other. So please jump on the website and have a look and see what you think. And if you've got any questions, reach out. Michael, I want to say thank you so much for coming on today. I know it's worth checking out Michael's website as well, because there are some really great training programs and offerings there for people, particularly in that sports space. If you're trying to get your sporting club up and going, there's some great inclusion programs there that you've got running. Where can people find you, Michael?
Yeah, so if they're into sport-related stuff, they can head to inclusivesportdesign.com. And check out, there's a heap of free stuff and downloads and templates and stuff, as well as a few paid programs as well. Also consult and things like that. If e-learning is something you're into, looking for solutions, whether it's learning management system or it's course creation or just general advice, then head to impactleaders.online, which is the e-learning business. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn as well, and feel free to reach out to me there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much to everybody today, and for those who are going to watch the replay again, it will be on my YouTube channel with the captions attached to it by sometime tonight, so you can share from there or watch from there if you want to grab those captions. And see you all next week.